5 years ago, Daniel had a spot on the back of his head, and he was shaving one day because he used to shave his head. It started bleeding, and from that day it didn't really stop. So I mean, you know, men, they don't like to get things like that looked at. So I booked him a doctor's appointment, and begrudgingly he went down. The doctor thought it was some kind of a wart on the back of his head, but he took it off and got it tested anyway. And then we got a phone call 4 days later, found out he got skin cancer. So he had the skin cancer removed, and what they did surgery, so they cut them all off, and then they did a deeper surgery to try and get the remaining cells out, if there were any. So he kept going for checkups, and they kept checking his moles and checking he's got no lumps or bumps anywhere, and that's been ongoing now for 5 years. So in September, he started, and he kept saying that he couldn't cope at work and he needed some headphones to shut the noise out, and the noise was bothering him. And I thought, you know, men being men, I just thought, oh, he's just been ridiculous here. But then he started with these headaches, and he kept saying that it was the stress that's causing these headaches, and he'd come home from work and he'd just be pushing at his head like that. So he went to see the doctor, and they diagnosed him with tension headaches. But then he started having episodes where I couldn't even be in the same house as him and start talking. Like, I was having a phone conversation with my friend upstairs in October time, and he came upstairs. He says, "Suzanne, you're going to have to go up into the attic." I says, why? You're being ridiculous. He says, "Because I can't stand it." And so after that episode, we went to the hospital, and we got turned away saying it was migraines. To cut a long story short, we saw about 8 different doctors. So he'd gone from September to December, and or the 9th of December, and I was due to teach at the university. And Dan, because he was off sick with his headaches, tension headaches, he was due to take Jack to school. And Jack, our 7-year-old, started talking to him in the morning, and all of a sudden I heard Dan just going, "Stop it, Jack, stop it, Jack," and he was crying. And I thought, what's he crying for? So I came downstairs. I says, "What's the matter with you?" He says, "I can't take it, I can't take it." I was really worried about him. I'd already done my research being a journalist and found out that actually malignant melanoma does metastasise to the brain, and it is very common. In over 50% of the cases you will end up with brain cancer. I made a list of the symptoms, and we went to this specific hospital, and one of the doctors there said to me, "I'm telling you now, even though he was seeing double vision," he says, "I'm worried about melanoma." He says, "I'm telling you now, it's got nothing to do with melanoma. He has got migraine." He says, "Ibuprofen, paracetamol, regular will treat it. If it was malignant melanoma, there'll be some other lump somewhere." So I thought, right, well, I've done everything that I can possibly do. So we went home that night, and I thought, right, he's just got migraine then, it's just men. so I treated him for migraine, because I thought, I've done everything I can possibly do. And then on the 20th of December 2010, I came in from fetching Jack from school. So I've got Christopher, who's now 2, but he was 1 then. I got Christopher and Jack with me, and he were laid on this settee, and he were clutching his head, and he looked grey. That's all I can remember. He looked grey. And I says, "Come on, Dan." I says, you've got to get up. You've got to, you know, Christopher's going to come in. I says, "And you can't stand," you know, he couldn't stand to be around the children at this point. And he says, "I can't." I says, "Come on, you're going to have to." And I tried to touch him. He was going, "Get off me." I says, "Come on, go upstairs." He says, "I can't feel my right side." So I said to him, "All right, then I'll ring you an ambulance." And normally when I've been saying that in past, he said, no, I'm fine. But he didn't say anything. So I got the children, and I put them in the kitchen, and I sat Christopher down in his high chair, strapped him in, and I gave him ice lollies to keep him quiet. I phoned 999, got him an ambulance. Ambulance people got here, and they said, "Well, if it's tension headaches, why have you phoned us?" I says, "Because there's something not right." I was quite calm at this point. I thought, well, it's going to be a migraine. Took me time getting him some stuff together for the hospital, and I remember going up there and thinking, oh, they're just going to turn him away. He's just going to be there again. And I got there, and he didn't even know who I were. And I just remember seeing him, and I was in a state of shock. Like, what the heck's going on? And I said to the consultant, I says, "Please, can you do something?" And we found out that he'd actually got 5 brain tumours. And the metastasis that spread to his lungs. It were like I'd been smacked in the face. It were awful. And I remember going outside at the hospital and ringing my mum. And I just said, "Mum, he's got brain cancer." Screaming, shouting, why wouldn't they listen? Why wouldn't they listen? It were like being trapped in your worst nightmare. That night were awful. By the time I got to see him the next day, he knew who I were. And the first thing he did was stick his tongue out and blow a raspberry at me. I said, you've got to be kidding. You know, we were talking about chemotherapy and radiotherapy and that kind of thing. So I thought, you know, it's going to be tough, but it actually, we might get out of this. And it weren't until we saw the oncologist, and I remember saying, yeah, and when Dan's better, we're going to do this and that. And she looked at us and she said, I said, what is the prognosis? She said, once skin cancer gets below the skin, we can't do anything, we can't cure him. He says, all we can do is extend life. And I said, you know, how long? He says, 6 to 12 months, the maximum.